So get comfortable, get your coffee, get your water. It is only noon, so I'll stop the list there. I'm going to give about a minute. My clock says 12:03. I'm going to give it till 12:04 and then we'll get started. All right, why don't we get started? Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. This is our second week of Communities Create. This is podcasting week. I see some familiar faces, which I love. I love to see return participants. People who were with us for Photography Week. I think everyone can agree it was a really fantastic workshop. And I have high hopes for today, having seen the tech run through as well. I think I introduced myself, but I don't remember. I'm Ramona Pringle. I'm the director of the Creative Innovation Studio at FCAT at Ryerson University. A few words on Communities Create. You're all here, so you probably know, but our goal is to do two things. We want to support the creative community through micro grants to independent creators and artists who are leading these incredible workshops. And in parallel, we want to leverage or tap that creative community to help unify Canadians. All of our workshops ask the umbrella question, how are you feeling right now? I think we are all asking, how are you? How are you feeling in multiple phone calls and Zoom meetings every single day, but we don't necessarily have the time or the language or the capacity to really answer that right now. So all of these workshops are there to help us when words just don't seem to be enough. And I think audio, today's workshop is on podcasting and using audio to create a narrative about life in quarantine or life in isolation, and what an amazing tool set to be able to do so. The goal really is to unify, to help us express how we're feeling in what is unprecedented times. And so we want you to share. I'm going to just go over a few ground rules to make the experience as good as possible for you and for everyone else who's participating before we get started. And knowing that some people will roll in as we go, I might repeat these just a little bit later on, but it's not a lot. So for starters, you want to find the Communities Create thumbnail on your screen right now. If it's because there's a lot of participants, it may not be on your home screen. You may need to scroll through to find it, but find the thumbnail that's labeled Communities Create. You'll see my face in it right now, and you want to pin it. You can pin it in the top right corner. You'll see 3 dots. In the drop-down menu there, you'll have the option to pin. And what that will do is it'll give you the sort of edited broadcast view with all the examples that Amanda's going to be sharing. So in terms of good experience, that's the first thing I would suggest. Next of all, this is interactive and participatory. There are activities for you to try or exercises for you to try. I highly encourage that you try them yourselves. The whole point is that sometimes creativity can be overwhelming. It can be hard to know where to begin, but the idea is that we just jump right in so there isn't that sort of blank page syndrome that we all feel so often. Next, use the chat feature on the side to be able to comment and ask questions. This works really well because we're keeping everyone on mute. Your microphone will be muted. You were muted upon entry. And this is so that the flow, we don't interrupt the workshop leader. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that you are in control of your video feed. And so if you want privacy, if you don't want people seeing you, you are able to turn off your video. If you've asked a question in the chat, there are times when we're going to be pointing to different people who have asked questions so that they can ask their questions themselves. And at those points, we'll turn on your microphone. So we can control your audio, but you are totally in control of your video. It's totally up to you. We want you to share your comments, your questions using the Communities Create hashtag. This is certainly true once you've created your podcasts after today, but even as we're going throughout this workshop, if there's things you're feeling, if you just want to sort of share with the broader world how the workshop is going, we'd love for you to do that to help get the word out. And I think that's it right now. Your video is controlled by you. It's only viewable to other participants. It's not going to be recorded. So we're very conscious about the sort of user experience here. We do have the ability, if anything happens that's unfriendly or unwelcome, to boot participants, but I hope we don't have any of that as well. The whole point is to have a really healthy and positive experience for everyone who's participating. So I think that's it for the ground rules. I'd love to get started. As I mentioned, this is interactive, and as such, there's a number of people who are in this call in addition to Amanda. So Amanda is the artist who is leading the workshop this week. But in addition to Amanda, and it's not just a YouTube tutorial, you can actually ask her questions as we go and comment on things as we go. In addition to Amanda, there's moderators who are staying on top of the chat so that they can see what you're saying, maybe answer some of your questions for you. We've also got Diana Breacher, and Diana is heading up our mental health task force. So at this moment, I'm going to hand the virtual floor over to Diana. I'd love to hear a few words from you, Diana. One of the reasons we are doing this is to give people a creative outlet for their emotions. Can you maybe just say a few words? Tell us a little bit about your role here, please.
Hi, Ramona, thank you so much. Welcome everyone. My role is to kind of be part of a safety net or a support system for anybody who feels, for whatever reason, that their emotions feel more intense than they're comfortable with. So I have two PhD students in psychology from Ryerson who are with me today. That's Rachel and Amy. And we're going to be available both through the chat function and also afterwards. When we stop recording, there's going to be a brief period, about 10-15 minutes, where we're going to be there if you want to debrief the session for whatever reason. We don't anticipate that anyone is going to get terribly distressed, but just in case something comes up for you, you think it might be helpful to ask about resources that would support your mental health, or you want to just talk something out, we're here to do that for you. So welcome, and I hope you have a wonderful experience today.
Thank you so much, Diana. Now I would like to invite Fiona O'Connor from the Toronto Public Library. Toronto Public Library is our wonderful host partner sponsor for this week. And so I'd love a few words from you about your organization's reason for joining Communities Create, what you're most excited about with this podcasting session. Fiona?
Yes, sorry, I had problems unmuting myself. Hello, my name is Fiona O'Connor, and I work at the Toronto Public Libraries. I work in the Public Library innovation team. So during the COVID-19 crisis, the library is providing access to online programs to help Torontonians build their skills, to connect with one another, and the programs include author talks, workshops, story times, book discussions, and much more. So please do visit tpl.ca to learn some more. So the library is excited to collaborate on today's program hosted by Ryerson's Creative Innovation Studio. And I'm delighted to introduce Amanda Cupido, our former innovator in resident. Amanda is an award-winning podcaster, producer, and the author of Let's Talk Podcasting, The Essential Guide to Doing It Right. She teaches audio storytelling at Seneca's College of Media and runs podcasting workshops and consultation sessions. So previously, she has worked as radio producer, reporter, and news anchor at Newstalk 1010 CFRB. So please welcome Amanda. Thank you.
I'm just noting that I do see some comments over on the right-hand side about being able to pin that thumbnail for Communities Create, and it looks like it's being answered. Our team will answer as well. So I'm going to get on with things, but we'll make sure that that's answered so that you are seeing the feed as you wish. Amanda, would you like to say a few words about your own career and your podcasting work before we get started?
Thanks, Ramona. I think that Fiona really summed it up well. I'll just add that I've been a real audio lover for a long time, and so I'm really happy that right now podcasting seems to be trendy, so it's finally cool to be telling audio stories, and so I'm really excited for what this new chapter is going to hold with regard to audio storytelling.
And obviously the elephant in the room is that we're all in our own homes, isolated, not together at Ryerson or at the Toronto Public Library right now. So given the times, can you just maybe share your thoughts on the role of creativity in crisis with us?
Yeah, I think that, for me personally, as a creator, I would say that audio storytelling and creativity is beautiful because it allows you to access both the highs and the lows. So when you're feeling really down, it can be that outlet to let that out, and it works. But when you're feeling really high and motivated, it also is there for you to lean upon. So I just love the duality that creativity brings, especially audio storytelling.
Great. Well, I would say without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to you to get started.
Thanks, Ramona, and hi, everyone. So really excited for all of you to be here. I'm just going to give you a quick rundown with what the workshop is going to entail today, so you know what's coming up. We're going to do a little bit of an introduction to podcasting right off the top, make sure we're all on the same page. I'm then going to move into talking about some myths, debunking some podcasting myths, and letting you listen to some examples and best practices. We'll listen to 5 different snippets throughout the session. We're also going to have a lot of polls and activities, so I encourage you to take part. And at the end, we're going to pose the question, how are you feeling right now? And give you the opportunity to actually create something throughout this week to answer that question. We'll tell you more about this mini assignment at the end, but I am hoping that you guys will feel inspired in being able to take part in creating something that we'll be able to bring together into our own little mini series. Then right before I give you some time for Q&A, I'll also list off a bunch of tools that you'll be able to use in order for you to take part with tools that are for free at your disposal. So stay tuned for that. If you are still having some questions, I'll be on for Q&A at the end as well. So you can ask questions throughout by all means, but also know that there will be that opportunity at the end of the session. So let's just get started. The introduction, I'm going to start off with a poll, which is what describes you best. I love to get to know the audience a little bit and see where you're at. So the first question is just seeing, what describes you best? Brand new to podcast listener, or a podcast listener and creator. No matter where you fall, the session will be for you, but it's just always interesting to see where people are at. All right, so we got, seems like podcast listener is the number one answer as more trickle in, but we've got both people that are brand new to podcasts and people who've already created podcasts themselves. Awesome. Thank you guys for voting. So with this, if you're brand new to podcasts, I would say keep your ears open. If you're a podcast listener and or creator, I would say right now, feel free to chime into the chat with what's your favorite podcast right now or what you've been listening to throughout this isolation quarantine time. There might be some new ones that have come up or some old staples that you've gone to. I find that a lot of people love to share their podcast recommendations because sometimes it's hard to actually find a list of top podcasts or find new ones unless you hear it from a friend. So feel free right now to pop into the chat. What are you listening to? What's your favorite podcast or what's been getting you through? And those of you who are new to podcasts, you might have a little playlist by the end of this for you to take apart. Or if you have heard of one, feel free. Front Burner, I see great. CBC podcasts are awesome. Armchair Expert is a classic. Dax Shepard is hilarious. New York Times, The Daily, High Standard, amazing. Radio Lab classic, these are cool. This is Love, CBC, awesome. Oh, and I always love getting new ones for my own self. This is partially self-serving. Outrage and Optimism, never heard of it. I'm going to check it out for sure. One of my favorites I'll just share is Modern Love from the New York Times. You may know that it also got turned into an Amazon Prime show. But I was listening to the podcast long before that, and I just loved the creativity in its format, which is something we're going to be talking about, how to choose a format for a podcast. But also, you'll notice that they are flexible, and if you listen to their seasons, like 1 until present, they've actually shifted based on analytics and user response and listener response, and so I think that's really admirable too. One really cool fun fact about Modern Love is that they do a lot of sound design and sound effects to go hand in hand with the stories that they're sharing. And these are like written stories that they just retell. But the sound designer who I met at a conference told me that he actually goes and gets the exact sound. So if someone's writing about the corner of Yonge and Dundas, he literally goes to the corner of Yonge and Dundas and doesn't just get random street sounds. He like goes to the specific places to get the sounds that are being referenced. So I think that's really neat and a true art form in itself, which we'll be able to talk to more. Revisionist history, Malcolm Gladwell, another one of my favorites. Thanks for sharing How I Built This. These are good. Lots of good ones there. So I encourage you guys to check out ones that other people have listened to too, in addition to Modern Love. So now let's just start into some fun facts about podcasting before we listen to our first clip. First off, podcasting started in 2004. The word itself, podcast, comes from the word iPod, and broadcast put together makes podcast. And so this was in 2005, picking up steam right away. It was named the Word of the Year by Oxford Dictionary. So we saw this uptick in podcasting in this first wave, as it's referred to commonly. Then it kind of plateaued, and in 2014, we saw another big uptick in podcasting. This was the year, of course, that Serial was released, so very popular podcast that I'm sure many of you have heard of. This is also the year that many people don't realize this, but that Apple separated out the podcast player button out of iTunes. So there's a lot to say about the digital space and how it was engaging with users in order for it to become more popular as well. And then the third wave, I believe we're in it right now, which is last year was the biggest podcast company acquisition. Spotify purchased Gimlet Media, which is a podcast production company out of the US. And so we're seeing a lot of shifts happening right now. We're seeing a boom in branded podcasts. We're seeing a boom in kids podcasts. So it's a really exciting time to take part in creating audio stories for yourself or even for a business. So with that, it brings me to our first clip that we're going to play. This was a podcast that was created for a business called Envoy. It was produced out of Canada, which I find is great. I always love to give a shout out to Canadian audio production. And so it was created by a company called Pacific Content. And what I really love about this example is that it goes to show that there's no perfect length for a podcast. And this is one of the first myths we'll be busting. A lot of people ask when I'm doing workshops, how long is a typical podcast, or what is the best length for a podcast? There is no one answer for that. Typically, a lot of people lean to the 20-minute, half an hour, 45-minute mark for what they're used to. And then they sometimes feel like that's how long a podcast episode has to be, which can be a bit daunting. But what I have to say is you can actually tell a really great story within a short period of time. So this first clip is going to be about 3 minutes and 25 seconds. So stay tuned for this whole thing. And as you're listening, I'll just ask you to pay attention to, number one, the completion of the story, and if you felt it was done justice in that short period of time. And also the use of sound effects. There's going to be an ongoing gong sound. And at the end, I'm going to ask you what you thought about that. So let's take a listen.
Envoy office hack number 4, the robotic sales gong.
Today's Envoy office hack is all about uniting the office and sharing wins with the whole team. And it's from our own office here at Envoy, where we get excited every time we sign up a new customer. So excited that we like to celebrate with a bang, or more accurately, by ringing a gong. But we don't have your ordinary run-of-the-mill gong. we've got a custom job. I got Wells Riley, a product designer here at Envoy, to show me what he came up with.
So it's a automated sales gong for our organization. So every time we get a new customer, the gong will automatically ring itself. So we had this little sales gong in our office when I first joined, and we didn't use it because there was nobody directly responsible for doing sales. And we all felt kind of weird going up to the gong and ringing it ourselves. So one day I just kind of stole it from the office and grabbed a Raspberry Pi out of my drawer of electronic stuff and took it upon myself to just build a motor for it and write a very little bit of code and get it so that it rings itself every time we make a sale. Well, it makes people really happy when they hear it because, we have other reporting tools that tell us when we make money, but you can hear the gong everywhere in the office. And on certain quiet days, you can hear it outside of the office. So when you hear it, it makes you happy. And we all have this ritual where anytime it rings, everybody in the office says yay in the most unenthusiastic tone possible. And that in itself is like a ritual that we have that makes it a lot more fun.
I really like the gong.
It's almost like Pavlovian, right? You hear the gong go off and everyone goes, yay! and especially when it first started off, now, after months of it, just you just, yay! Everyone's like,
Well, fortunately, I wrote a guide on how to do it. If you follow the link in the description, there's a guide that has all the parts and some code samples so you can set it up with your own company. The hardest part was definitely working with the motor because, as it turns out, servo motors are very complicated. And for someone who's not an engineer like myself, it took a little bit of tinkering and a little bit of smoke to get it to actually work correctly and not hit the gong too hard or swing backwards and have the mallet go flying in the opposite direction. My favorite thing is that it's a really geeky way to solve the problem of making sales exciting in an engineering-driven company without having to actually get up from your desk and do anything. It's just all automatic.
What's the best thing about the gong?
When it goes off.
If you'd like instructions on how to make your own sales gong and lots of other hacks to make your office.
All right, so there you have it. That was a full episode of a podcast. As you saw, we were about to get into the credits there. So that was about 3.5 minutes. Before I discuss it, I'm going to pop up another poll onto the screen. What do you think about the gong? Was it used too much, not enough, or just the right amount? Let's see what you have to say. I don't know if you guys are paying attention to how many times the gong went off. I personally thought it was used just the right amount. Some people thought it was used too much. It was used a lot. So within the 3.5 minutes piece, it was used 7 different times. So that's a lot. And actually on paper, it sounds like a lot. But when you're hearing it and as it's interwoven into the story, it actually acts like a little bit of a punctuation mark. Or sometimes it was used to break up 2 different ideas. So most of you thought it was used just the right amount. Cool. And that's okay. Some of you thought it was used too much. This is another piece about audio storytelling. It's very subjective. So sometimes there's no such thing as a good voice and a bad voice. Some voices are going to resonate with audiences more than others, and that's okay. And you're basically just trying to create something that you think is authentic and that's going to serve the audiences that you're intending it for. So all of this to say is that there's a lot of space for creativity. Sometimes things that you put down on paper don't actually translate the same way when you actually create the audio story itself. If you would have come to me and said, hey, I'm going to use a gong sound 7 times in a 3.5 minute audio piece, what do you think? I would have said, no, that sounds like a bad idea. But when it actually came all together with the story around it, it really was actually able to bring the story to life. So let's break this down now. So this was kind of a scene setter piece. It's a very slickly produced podcast. There's a lot of elements that went into that. And it might seem intimidating if you're trying to create something like that for the very first time. But we're going to actually take different elements of this and show you how you can do it yourself. So first off is the sound effect. We're talking about this gong sound. If you're looking to tell a story about yourself, especially to answer the question, how are you feeling right now? You might not really know what sound effects you can use, especially since we're just inside. So I'm going to play an example of an audio piece I created while I was the innovator in residence at the Toronto Public Library. I use this as part of my workshops, but I find it really relevant for right now. And it was just trying to show you how you can pick up sounds from just literally anything that you're doing. The element of using sounds to create an environment is called soundscaping. Being strategic with where you put those sounds is sound design. These are some words you'll hear in the podcasting industry. Might sound daunting, but it's actually quite easy. So let's take a listen to the example that I created from the library.
I'm the podcasting innovator in residence at the Toronto Reference Library. I figured the best way to connect with you was through an audio story. So this is me walking out of the library at Yonge and Bloor. You'll hear the clickety-clack of the Balzacs, the revolving door leading me outside. Yeah, it's windy. Oh, and of course the beeping of the crosswalk. The beautiful thing about telling stories this way is that it puts the audience where the action is. Through sound, you can feel like you're right alongside me as I walk down the street. It's pretty magical if you ask me. Now, my background...
All right. So some of those sounds might have been hard to hear through how we're playing it through the Zoom. So just know that we're going to actually be sending out all the links to all of these audio stories in a follow-up email. So if you guys want to take a listen back to some of these again, you'll be able to have that opportunity to do so. And also, I'll encourage you once again right now, if you're learning any fun facts or having some aha moments, feel free to share on your social media channels using #CommunitiesCreate. So what I'll say about this sound effects piece is that, number one, I recorded all of that just using my phone. I literally held my phone and walked out of the library onto the street, and I just recorded what I could record. So this is a really powerful recording tool. Second off, some of the sounds, I wasn't actually sure what I was gathering. So I did a scripted narration on top of that, but I based the script off of the sounds I gathered. So I didn't go out trying to make a certain sound. I just let it organically happen. And so, you know, you might have noticed when I walked through the revolving door, it was quite windy that day. And I didn't realize how much wind my phone was going to pick up, but it did. It was like, whoosh. And I was like, oh, shoot. A lot of people would have typically been like, I need to edit that out, or how can I work around this? I wasn't wanting wind. But what I say for podcasting, the best way, again, authenticity, lean into it. I got a lot of wind, so I just added into the script, whoa, it's windy, right? And I just leaned right into it. So sometimes if you're recording, for instance, at home for this little assignment that we're going to be giving you, you might have kids screaming in the background, or you might have someone cooking and clanking pots. And instead of feeling like you have to redo it over and over again, I would say don't. Just lean into what is happening around you and acknowledge it. I think that's actually the beauty of podcasting. It allows it to feel real. It allows it to feel like you're alongside the person in their journey with whatever that journey looks like for you. And that's what makes it particularly unique. So right now, just to get you guys warmed up, I'm going to ask you to take out your phone and find the sound recorder or voice recorder application. This usually comes preloaded on your phone. Some of you might know where this is already. If you are having trouble finding it, it's good to use in the search bar. You could just put recorder or voice. Sometimes it's titled differently depending if you have a Samsung, or Android, or an Apple phone. And it can look a little differently. It either will look like an audio line or it'll look like a microphone, a little microphone icon. So hopefully you are, what about the sound of your fridge? I see Lana asking. That's okay too. And that's actually something you could record right now. So I'm going to ask you to turn on that sound recorder and literally do a walk around with whatever space you're in right now. Just do a walk around and maybe go open up the fridge and close it and come on back and see what kind of sounds you gather. Are you picking up your footsteps? Is your floor conducive to being picked up? Maybe you're not going to pick up anything, and that's okay too. You're going to learn how to be wielding this thing to gather some sounds. So let's just give you a couple minutes, turn on that sound recorder, let us know if you're having some issues finding it, and we can help you give you some more additional tips depending on your device. And we're going to give you a couple minutes to try it yourself. So go on and give it a try.
Thanks, Amanda. That's great. I'm going to go try myself right now.
Okay.
Amanda, while we're waiting, actually, Todd has a question. Do you feel the bottom part of the phone is the best place to gather sound from nearby objects?
Thanks for the question, Todd. So it depends what kind of phone you have. Some phones will have two recording microphones from the top and the bottom, and some will just have it from the bottom. So if you are wanting to be safe, yes, I would say using this as a director of pointing it towards what you want to capture. But also being mindful that it is a pretty sensitive recorder. So you don't actually have it to be super close. You can, like, as I was walking with the phone, think about I got the clinkety clank of the Balzacs as I was walking out of the library. I didn't even walk through the Balzacs and I still picked it up. So you might be surprised how powerful the microphone is. Oh, Balzac's is just a coffee shop. Sorry. Yes, that is the spelling.
I'm all of a sudden so much more aware of all of the sound that's around me that I don't pay attention to. YouTube Kids on low volume.
Right? There's a lot of sound. And actually, even when you think you're sitting in silence and you record, you'll notice when you play it back, there's some sort of something going on usually. And it's just that we've learned to tune out some of those lower sounds. But those are kind of the sounds that allow for audio texture, which is another term used in the industry to describe that kind of depth when it comes to layering sound. So as people are coming back, I was just going to say, if people are prepared, if they would like to share their sounds, we can unmute you and have you share for sure. So feel free to put your hand up or put a comment in the chat if you are wanting to share what you recorded, or if you have any sort of thoughts or realizations, feel free to pop that into the chat as well.
Amanda, I have a question while we're waiting for people. Do you have advice on layering sounds? Like what kind of sounds you should be thinking about if you want to sort of build them up together?
Yeah. So I think layering sounds would definitely be something that is more advanced. So if you're ready to try to using multiple sounds, definitely go for it. You'll have to be editing in something called a multi-track. So you're having you're not actually just slapping the sounds on top of each other in one track. You're going to be able to control the volume of each of the audio clips and then see them and play them back. And I would say that you shouldn't try to have sounds competing with each other. So this is a lot of the art and work of sound designers. So you want the sounds, you want to be really intentional. Which sound you want the loudest, and then you're going to build backwards from there, or the opposite. Start at what you want the lowest and build up from there, right? So be really intentional with which sound is going to come in at what point and why. So you should be able to be mindful of that. I'm getting some really good questions. Were you carrying the script as you were recording your walk outside of the library? So no, I just recorded the sound first, and then I did the scripting in post-production, as we'll call it. So that's why I was able to, the wind, I wasn't sure what was getting picked up. So I recorded all the sounds, then I listened back to it, and then I wrote the script based on the sounds that I gathered. And so, yeah, and if you want to share what you recorded, yep, we have some, yeah, please feel free to let us know.
Believe Rob is willing to share his walkthrough. So Rob, I'm going to unmute you now.
Hey, Rob.
Just walking around. I'm in a basement apartment. Look, hammock.
Having a bit of a hard time hearing you.
Go upstairs and check in on Don.
Oh, you're playing the audio, so yeah.
Hello, puppy. Are you having a grand time today? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Who's a pup? Here we go. Right.
Wendy's going to come and drop off my computer.
Okay, cool. All right. Right. Off we go.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Rob. I think that was the end of it, right? Yeah, that was perfect. And so a great example of someone who, that the dog came up to him and he just leaned into it. Hey, what's up, puppy? You know, you hear someone else talking in the background, and it actually made you feel like you were walking there beside him in his house. I think that's like the beauty, is that like you could transport people by just recording live what's going on around you. So really great little scene. That was a scene in itself. So easily done in a couple of minutes. Thank you so much for sharing. I know it was a little bit low. I know we have Catherine who said she's willing to share as well. So maybe we could try playing it from her phone as well into the speaker and have a listen.
Okay, Catherine, I'm going to unmute you. I would recommend make sure your phone speaker is turned up all the way, and that'll help.
Okay. So this recording was made inside my house and then walking through a door into the yard and then back inside again. And this is what it sounds like.
Actually, I still picked it up. So thanks, Amanda. That's great. I'm going to go try myself right now.
So you can hear the smoothie being made. The sliding door. And then the contrast to the outside sound. Those are seeds being collected and being put down on the ground for the birds in the backyard. And a call to the birds in the neighborhood to come and get the seeds. That's the sliding door. And then I'm back in the podcast.
That's awesome. Thank you, Catherine. That was so good. And someone put in the chat that they love to hear the birds. And I was about to say the exact same thing. You can't plan that, right? You cannot when you want to catch a bird, I bet you wouldn't, right? To get that bird chirp. But just like walking out and setting that scene and having that there, it's like a cheerful, happy, beautiful sound. And, sometimes with a little bit of lack of planning and just letting things happen, you end up getting some really beautiful pieces coming through. Yeah, and it's amazing how much you can hear without the traffic. I see Lorena, right? Exactly, which is why it's really interesting and neat to see what kind of audio stories might come out of this workshop even. They're going to be special, one of a kind in a time, as we all say, is unprecedented, but I think it's going to be pretty special in and of itself. So I'm going to move on, but thank you for everyone for trying it. If you have any other questions, pop them in the chat. I did see some questions come through about editing programs. We're going to get to that when I talk about the tools at the end. But now I just want to talk about a different style of storytelling. So if you're really wanting to focus on one person, here's another myth. A lot of people think that podcast means you have to have a microphone and you have to sit down and interview someone. And then you're going to chat back and forth. And this is called the chatcast. And that is a very popular type of podcast style, but it's not the only type of style you can do. And one of the beautiful things about podcasting is that it's been said to be one of the most inclusive mediums, and a lot of the community, the podcast community, is really dedicated to lifting the voices of those that are typically underrepresented. And one of those buckets is the voice of the elderly. And so I actually had a chance to produce a podcast series for Ryerson University on behalf of the Alumni Association, where we did non-narrated audio vignettes. So vignette is just referring to the shortness, the length of it. So it was a very short story. The whole thing was 5 minutes. And non-narrated means my voice was only there off the top, and the rest of it was just the voice of the subject, of the person I had interviewed. But in order to truly lift his voice and, keep the focus on him, I just felt like it was good to do it in this kind of a format. So let's take a listen to an example of that.
This is Ryerson Rewind, a podcast featuring alumni sharing their fondest memories from Ryerson.
My name is Terry O'Connor. I graduated from journalism in 1958. We're in the Quadrangle, which is a beautiful, quiet place in the center of the city, and it has memories for me because Ryerson was entirely located in the Quadrangle when I was here, and the Quonset hut that I went to school in was down at the south end, looking out on Gould Street and the O'Keefe Brewery. You could smell the hops and the malt when they were brewing. My goodness, it came in through the windows, and it was a distraction. This campus has grown so fantastically. It's just amazing. Now it's spread north, east, south, and west. That surprised me, because back then I thought, if it grew, where would it grow? There didn't seem to be any place for it to go outside of, this square was fenced in. There was an iron spike fence all around it. And it seemed to be saying, this is it, but it turned out not to be. I'm amazed at how much property they've acquired, and they're still growing. So it's just amazing.
So there's another example of those background sounds. I was interviewing him in the spot he was talking about, and I just felt the background sounds allowed you to feel like you were there with him. Yep, there was kids running around, there was birds chirping again, and I thought, it's great. It just sets the scene, as long as it's not completely detracting from your main focus. So in those cases, yeah, great to have the background sound. But you just want to make sure that it's not so loud that you can't even hear the person talking. That's when you would start to say, maybe pause, let that really loud sound pass, and then continue and maybe make that edit. But in that case, he was just telling his story. It's a single voice. The entire episode is just him. It was unscripted, obviously, right? He was just talking to me. I asked some prompting questions, but then went back and removed my questions and was able to string together his answers in a way that still made sense as far as the story went. And I trimmed it down significantly. But you can do as much or as little editing to something like that as you'd like. And so that's another way that you might be able to tell a story or answer the question, how are you feeling? And it's these kind of creative formats that I feel sometimes get forgotten when people are talking about how to make podcasts. And we're seeing that, if you noticed in that first clip, the Envoy Office hacks, there wasn't actually very much narration in that one either. They really focused it on people talking about the gong. You might have heard the journalist pop in once or twice with a question, but other than that, it was almost basically a non-narrated piece in itself, but had a lot of sound design throughout. So that was a good example of how you could kind of meld those two formats. Let's move on. Now, I want to bust another myth. So a lot of people think that podcasts have to appeal to large groups of people, and that there's also a lot of podcasts out there already and already very populated, saturated, space. Why create something else? Everything's been done. All of that is garbage to me. I really don't believe in that. The beauty of podcasting is that it can service very niche audiences. And this is one of its biggest differences from radio. Radio is being broadcast. And so you have to assume, that sound wave is going out. Lots of people are going to catch it. And we want to serve, a fair amount of that population. But if you actually really target a very specific niche that would have, this is an example, we're about to play one that would have never aired on the radio, but there is a great deal of people who are looking for this kind of content. So the example I'm going to play is a podcast called Sleep With Me, and it's a podcast with one guy who just rambles and helps people fall asleep. And so it's like the most boring podcast on purpose. So this is someone who's tried to make boring content as a strategic move. So very creative, very niche, but he's come to see some great success. He's been picked up by a network. He has tons of advertisers, of course, hitting niche audiences, people who need help sleeping. Obviously, you can imagine his advertisers are like mattress companies and like sleepwear. So it's actually quite fitting. So we're just and he does some really random things. I can't even tell if it's all scripted or not. At one point I was listening to an episode, he just started counting sheep, playing music. Anyway, it's very random. So we're going to take just a little gander, a little listen to what this podcast sounds like.
I'd like to take your mind off of that. I'd like to keep you company. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send my voice across the deep, dark night. And kind of as a call or, like a y'all call. They say, hey, this is a safe place. Why don't you come on in? I'm going to send my voice across the deep, dark night to try to say that. And then do it with my hands. I don't know if you could really sense that, but I'm saying, hey, come on in. Safe place here. It's more of a safe general area, because you say safe place sounds like I'd have to check it out first. A safe area. You say, well, it's like it's not. I don't know. It's not as you're right. Maybe I don't know. I'd like to have something more catchy than that, but I don't have anything. But I'm going to use.
Okay, most important poll question of this workshop: are you still awake? Please say yes. Genuinely, I know this really does help people fall asleep. Yes, we still have you guys. You still with us? So boring, but that's good. Thanks, Lana. Yeah, exactly. That was the point. Again, this is another one of those ideas that if you might have pitched it, might not have sounded good, but then the moment you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, I could see how this would help me fall asleep. Yeah, people are going to download it. Called Sleep With Me. Yeah, it's really good. Good. No one's sleeping. Thank you. So yeah, and he's done hundreds of episodes. There's tons of content there. And I just really appreciated the creativity and how specific he was with zeroing in on an audience. So we're going to listen to one more sample before we get into talking more about my invitation to you to create your own story and some of the tools you can use. But I posed this same sort of assignment to my class of Seneca students. So I also teach at Seneca. I was teaching journalism in the winter as we kind of switched over into this online world. And so for our final assignment, we switched it to being telling stories of social distancing and isolation, which is exactly what we're talking about here as well. And I had two students do a really interesting take on it, and it might serve as inspiration to you for a type of story that you can tell. I really encourage them to break the format of the chatcast, traditional podcast, and do something creative. And so what these two students wanted to do was journaling, and day by day, track both of their own journeys in self-isolation, and then mesh them together. Now, you could obviously do this just by yourself with one person's style of journaling. I thought it was really unique how they did it with both of them. And an important thing to note as we go into listening to this clip is that one person scripted their journals and then read them. The other person just talked into their phone. So you're probably going to be able to tell which one was which, but keep an ear out for that. I love kind of listening to this sort of thinking about the production when I'm listening to podcasts. I'm like, how did they record that? Why did they do that? So this is like a good little prompt for when you're listening even to future pieces. Was this scripted or was this them just winging it? But let's take a listen to what those two journaling styles sounded like.
Day one.
Day one.
With the virus rampant, some have seen it as a break from the normality of life and decided to unwind. I am one of these people.
Day one, I guess. I honestly don't have much to report on, so I'll just tell you a bit about my situation.
I've decided to use it as a break to pick up on things that I have been meaning to learn, but just never had the time. Today I've set the day aside to finally learn cursive writing.
So my mother, in her kindest efforts, has dragged me from the depths of Ground Zero, which is also known as Toronto, and brought me home up to the woods. I'm here with her, my sister, and my mom's boyfriend, Don. So that's good, I guess.
The cursive writing handbooks that had been on my bookshelf for months after I had received it on my doorstep from Amazon Prime. There were dust particles at the front of the book, reminding me of the passage of time.
Okay, so I think you could tell which one was scripted and which one was free flow. And they have two different feels to them, right? Neither of them right or wrong. Again, podcasting and audio storytelling is so subjective. I actually, as a teacher for them, I really appreciated the two different styles and having them side by side. I thought that actually really worked. But for you, you might even want to dabble with both those types of storytelling, even all just yourself within one podcast. There's, again, a lot of room for creativity when trying to put together a specific format and direction for an audio piece. So we're going to try one more activity before we wrap up. And what I'm going to do right now is allow you to pick if you'd like to try the scripted or the free flow, and just answer the question, how are you feeling right now? And I'll encourage you, if you're going to script it, just to write down on a piece of paper and then read it into your phone. Or if you want to just answer that free flow, go back into that voice recorder on your phone and just speak into it and answer the question, how are you feeling right now? We'll give you a couple of minutes to try it.
Amanda, while we're waiting for people, I have a question for you with scripted and unscripted. And I don't know if other people experience this, but I find that once I've written something, it's very hard to get out of my head to just talk. And so do you have any, but I love the sound of just sort of natural expression as well. And I think that the two things can sound nicely together. So do you have advice? Is it just, if you're going to try and talk naturally, to just do that first before you try scripting something? Or how do you get out of your head once you've written something formally?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it is hard, even for professionals, like learning how to read and then talk naturally. Like a lot of news anchors will do this as they read a script and then talk to the host and back and forth. So don't be too hard on yourself. This is like things that people train for years to do. I would say that if you're really having trouble jockeying between the two, it might just be easier to stick with one or the other. As you mentioned, talking naturally first is also usually a good way to get into it. But also another tip I have is to write bulleted notes for yourself. So if you're going to have a script and then you're going to want to talk freely, you might be able to put the bulleted notes underneath so that you're then not stumbling upon talking freely. You already have some notes so you know where to jump off from, but it's just meant to act as a prompt so that you don't feel like you're left with a blank page after your script ends. Exactly, Pat, we're thinking alike. Exactly. Writing down just a couple of keywords is really helpful too. Sometimes it depends on, and I encourage people to just practice and try it. Sometimes that can throw people off and they feel so married to looking down on the piece of paper. And then they're like, what did I mean by that? And they start getting caught up on some of the specifics or the details that they don't have to. But yes, it's definitely, that's how I would do a lot of my live hits when I was in radio, for instance. I would just write keywords of like the 5 points I knew I needed to hit, or the numbers so I didn't get it wrong. And then I just talked around those bullets. So, and that's another good thing. Pat, thanks. Clearly tried this before. You don't have to do it in one take. You got multiple tries. You're not live right away with podcasting. Does someone else have a question?
I was just going to add to that, Amanda, that I think what's interesting right now is it feels like the prompt of how are you feeling just feels a little bit different than sort of any other topic when it comes to scripted versus unscripted, and sort of how you get into it and how you say what you really want to say and how you say what really rings true. And maybe Diana will have some interesting thoughts on this at the end of it also in the wellness and mental health debrief. But it feels like it's a lot to honestly convey how you're feeling. That's why I'm so glad that you also started with the sound effects and the soundscape piece of it.
Yeah, it's a big question. It's a heavy question. And by all means, if you felt like that was too heavy to answer right now, that is okay. But sometimes I do find that asking yourself a pretty pointed question, like how are you feeling right now, although maybe not as heavy, but a pointed question really does help you get started. Because sometimes I think when it's like something really general, like what's going on, when people even offer that in a chat cast, it's like you could go in a million different directions with that and end up taking 10 minutes just talking about nothing, which, might be a tactic in itself. But for the most part, if you are looking to create something pretty specific, it is nice to have something like a pointed question so you know what you're going in with. And in the case of my Seneca students, it was like daily touch points at the end of the day. What are they feeling? So now that we have everyone come back, we're just going to do a quick poll to see what you guys preferred. Did you prefer scripting it or just talking freely? Okay, I was really interested to see how this one would play out. Talking freely seems to be winning. Okay, interesting. But a couple of you who liked scripting. Yeah, so again, there's no right or wrong. Thanks for participating and taking part of this, guys. Having that sort of piece where you're able to try both even and then choose. So maybe if you did try just one and you really liked it, you might want to try the other one just to see how it differs. But they are very different, and they are, again, no right or wrong, but they are two different tactics you can use, and maybe strategically, if you find that you're getting lost with just talking, having your notes, or scripting it out. If you find that you get too married in your head when scripting, the other might be the best fit for you, where you just kind of talk freely. All right, so with that, I am going to start to talk a little bit more about this invitation to a story that I've been talking about this whole time. So what's exciting about these Communities Create projects is that we're wanting to really bring people together in this time where we're all apart. And so what we're going to invite you to do and ask if you would be willing is to create a story to answer that question of how are you feeling? And it can be in general, it can be in a specific moment, it can really be anything you want it to be. And then we are going to put them all together to create a podcast mini-series. So I find that a lot of times when people are wanting to start podcasts, it can be daunting also because it's like, oh, I have to do a half an hour once a week forever. And like that's another one of the myths that I try to bust in my workshop. Podcasts can be very short. And a lot of times they work best actually when they're produced with intentionality in a season, and they do have an end, and there's a certain number of episodes that are in one season, and then you take a break, and then maybe you do season 2, and maybe it's the same, maybe it's done differently, right? But you just commit to, even if it's like 6 to 8 episodes, that's a mini series, and that can be very successful. And that's actually trendy right now. So we're going to create our own series. And this is what's cool, is that we're all going to just do one episode, put them all together, and make it a series, the Communities Create podcast. And Toronto Public Library has been warm enough and welcoming enough to host all of your stories together on one page so that we'll have them all as a series together. So after this workshop, you're going to get instructions on how to take part of this if you would like to. There's going to be a Google form where you can submit. And we're actually going to give everyone a thumbnail as well for them to upload, so that when we put them all together, they are going to look cohesive and like they are one big series. And so all of these instructions will come to you in your inbox afterwards, after this session. But the biggest takeaway is that we would be asking you guys to put them up on your own SoundCloud account. So SoundCloud, for those of you who don't know, basically like YouTube of audio. You can host the sounds for free. And then you can share your SoundCloud link with us. And that's what we would ask, is that you're just submitting your SoundCloud link that also has the Communities Create thumbnail. So let's talk about some of, and there's that thumbnail. Yes, so beautifully designed. Thanks to the Communities Create team. So I do want to go through a list of tools, though, that will be helpful in you trying to take on creating these audio stories. So first one is your phone, which we've used today. And so I think you all are able to access that microphone recorder, which is great. Now, if some phones, a lot of phones, do not record in MP3 or WAV. So you might have some trouble uploading it to SoundCloud directly from your phone, or even putting it into certain audio editors. So it is important to convert that audio into an MP3 or WAV file. So there's a lot of free online audio converters that you can upload your audio to, and then just download the revised format, file format. So and again, we're going to get a nice meaty email after this workshop. So in this email, you'll also get a link to the online audio converter that I use. There's also other ones. If you have one of your own, feel free to use it, but you will get a link to an audio converter for you to help change over your file format from your audio recording of your phone. If you are wanting to record an interview with someone who is not in your household, there's a really great service through CleanFeed. And we're going to be able to send you that link as well. You're able to record people through their computer. They don't need to download anything. You just send them a link, and then you're able to download that audio right afterwards. And you can connect with someone and record a conversation if that's what you feel will best tell your story. And so you can definitely do that, and we will have that link for you as well. As far as using music and adding some sound scoring, like music scoring to your stories, I would definitely advise you to use the free music libraries that are available online. There's lots of them. Once again, I would be mindful of checking out what the creative stipulations are and what enables them to be free. And if you have to give attribution, being mindful of that. But I am going to send you a link to a free music library as well. That's really easy to download. And sometimes I feel with these libraries, they are a bit overwhelming because there's so much music out there. So I sent you one that's like pretty basic, and I like going to it just because it kind of hits all the different types of music, but it's not the biggest library where I feel overwhelmed. As me personally, as a professional, I always do like to plug Audio Jungle, where you are paying for music. And this is, again, if you you have the means and you're able to also support the, like creating music is an art in itself. And as a creator myself, I'm always so mindful of supporting artists. So I like to purchase my songs from Audio Jungle, and they're usually around $20. And it's kind of like creators can just upload their own compositions, and then that money will kind of like Etsy, but for audio, which I love. So anyway, no pressure at all, but just know that that is an option out there. And if you have the means to support the creative community that way, then power to you. But don't feel guilty otherwise. Another one with regard to editing. So we have Audacity, which is available for PC and Mac. You can download it. We're going to send the link to that. It's an audio editor. A lot of you might have GarageBand if you have a Mac computer already. And I did see someone popped into a chat a question about saying that Audacity wasn't really doing it for them. Had any other free recommendations? None that are free, but I think that's the whole thing. If you are wanting some of those more advanced skills or advanced options for editing, it is best if you invest in something, but you don't have to go all the way to doing an Adobe Audition, for instance, which can be quite pricey and is on a subscription base. I personally use Audition, but you might want to check out Hindenburg. We can also add that to our link that we send out. Hindenburg, first off, allows you to have a free 30-day trial. So even if it's just for the purposes of this workshop and you experimenting with it, I really love that you get that trial period. And then they have some really great student rates and group rates and discounts. So we can try, you could try that out. I also see Rob popping in talking about the DAW, Digital Audio Workstation Traction waveform for free. I've never even heard of that. So there you go. Thanks, Rob. And that might be another one worth checking out. We can include that link as well in our roundup. SoundCloud, which I mentioned earlier, you're going to be uploading your audio there. It's free. There are limits. So if you already have an account, you might have to be mindful of what your limits are. But if this is just a short story, shouldn't be an issue. You can also just create another account with a different email address. And lastly, an app that I really love is called Headliner. This is really good if you're wanting to share your audio story on social media without putting the SoundCloud link. So this is the thing. Social media, for some hilarious reason to me, does not still take audio files. I mean, it must be coming soon. I say this in every workshop, hoping that like by the next time I do a workshop, they will accept audio files. But they got to be working on this, I would imagine. But anyway, if you're wanting to share, you can definitely share your SoundCloud link onto your social media channels, specifically, like that would work well on Facebook or Twitter. But if you're wanting to share on Instagram, which is not the most link-friendly platform, you do have to make it into a video file. And so Headliner allows you to do that. So you basically just, for free, they do have limits again, but if you're just doing one episode, it should not be a problem. You just put up your audio file, and then you can choose a picture that you would like to accompany it, and then it like animates an audio wave to play at the bottom, and then you will be able to upload it directly to Instagram. And you can also use that video for Twitter and Facebook as well, if you would like. So with that, I am going to just open it up for some Q&A and see how you guys are doing, how you guys are feeling, if there's any questions or anything that that you have to ask or that you're wondering. We covered a lot, so thank you for taking that all in. Okay, so yes, we have a question about doing bilingual podcasts. Really great question. This is tricky, and there's a lot of people that are experimenting with this. So first off, I don't know if you've heard the Duolingo podcast. That's a Spanish-English one, and it's really interesting how they do it, and they edit it in a way so that even if you don't understand the Spanish clips, the English scripting around it allows you to kind of get the gist of what's happening, and just by hearing the person's voice, you can follow the story. It's really amazing and very skillfully done, so I would recommend checking that out if you want to do it with just audio. Another tactic, which I've done, so I've done a lot of work with World Vision, the charity, and I recently created a story series for them featuring Afghan women, and they were speaking Persian. So what we did was we hired voice actors to say the translated versions of their clips, but we still use their original clips just because we felt, number one, we want to honor their voice, and number two, there's some emotion that you're going to get from the real person that just like can't be paralleled by anyone else. So what I would do is I put the original clip, plays for a couple seconds, then I put the English translation. I would chop the English translation in the middle somewhere, and I would do like a sound up of the original clip again, then put back the English translation, and then always end with the original clip once again. So it kind of looked like a little bit of a wave. So it was like original speaker, translation, original speaker, translation, and then an original speaker at the end. So again, a more advanced tactic, but just know that that is a possibility. With regard to yours, you're talking about making it into a video and using closed captioning. That is also always an option. But technically then once it becomes a video file, it's getting out of the audio space. So it does change the dynamic a little bit. So another option also is to provide the translations through a script or a like transcript, Word document file so that people could follow along. So moving on, where would you recommend an emerging podcaster to begin publishing a podcast? Okay, so lots of options there. You could definitely, if you create a SoundCloud account now, you could put it up on SoundCloud. The thing with SoundCloud though is then it's for free, but you have to manually submit your RSS feed link, which SoundCloud would give to you. You have to manually submit it to iTunes, to Spotify, to all the platforms that you might want your podcast on. So if you're wanting to do it just for you and you have a niche audience and just having it on SoundCloud is okay, that's a great place to start because it's very easy. And to give you some really good stats, you get to see how many people downloaded it and how many people streamed it, which some of these podcasting apps don't necessarily offer to you. Anchor is another site that is for free. So again, if you're just starting and experimenting, I say that's a good place. But if you're actually serious and want to, take this to maybe a next level, a little more professional level, you can use platforms like Libsyn or Podbean. There are a couple of them out there that offer different packages. But I find Libsyn is really, moderately priced and gives you some great analytics and flexibility with how you upload. And then you just click literally one button and it goes everywhere. So you could one button, it's on Spotify, Instagram, iTunes, and all those places. And it actually connects with Headliner, that app, so you can make videos and eventually put them on Instagram from Libsyn. Okay, moving on. Yes, so we are gonna share all the resources in a follow-up, so don't you worry if you missed some things. You got all the links, and this is being streamed, so you can go back and watch the video again if you would like. Don't feel overwhelmed, Lee. I feel bad that you feel overwhelmed, but in the end of the day, even if you did something as simple as I was just trying to lay out all the options. If you do something as simple as recording it on your phone, converting the file, and directly uploading to SoundCloud, you don't have to actually edit at all if that feels too much to you, right? The phone thing, I think everyone was on board with. And then uploading to SoundCloud is literally like uploading to YouTube or, it's like you could just drag and drop it and upload it with a title. And you can also drag and drop into that audio converter. So also, you can continue to use the Communities Create hashtag as well on social media. And I'm going to be monitoring that throughout the week. Also, we're going to come back together on Friday. This is like the part 2 of this session, to play some of your pieces that you've created and have an additional Q&A and have people share how they did it. So there's lots of opportunities to, number one, continue learning and to stay connected to the community. Another option you have is if you do want to pair up with someone who's also on this video chat, you could do this in groups. And some people are more comfortable just recording and someone might be more interested in just the editing piece. So if you do think that there is one that you'd rather just focus on, you might want to do this with a partner. Sending audio to each other is pretty lean and you can do that. So feel free to connect with each other or pop into the chat if you're looking for a partner, and hopefully you could be able to also take that as an approach to hoping that you'll feel less overwhelmed that way. Buzzsprout, I've never personally used it, but I've heard it's good as an audio hosting platform. All of these platforms just have different packages, and just be mindful of what packages, what do you actually need from them, and what their terms and conditions are. So there are some odd things with Anchor, for instance, if you're trying to monetize it later. There are some limitations and restrictions you'll have to be aware of. So I would just say, make sure you read through the small print and find something that fits you and what you're looking to do. How do you begin to monetize a podcast? That is a whole workshop in itself. But what I will say quickly is that there's usually 3 tips I like to give to people with regard to monetization. Number 1, look out for grants. There's tons of grants coming out, especially now, looking for people to give people money to create podcasts and create audio. So there was one that was just posted by Audible and The Walrus. They're looking for some pitches for some Canadian scripted content. So if you're looking to like write a script and do more of like a fiction story, I think they were even open to nonfiction though as well. But anyway, you can look that up. There's lots of grants. You could also look at partnering with a brand. So if you're trying to create a podcast for the yoga community, there's already a lot of yogi communities out there. I'm just picking this at random. But there's so many yoga communities out there and yoga studios who might actually want to partner with you in creating a podcast and might have some funds available to you. And they'll already have had like a mailing list, and then you might be able to provide them with some, audio stories to serve a pre-existing audience so that you don't have to like build it from the ground up. So there's a lot of, associations and societies and nonprofits that might like really look for they may not be able to produce it themselves in-house, but you can look for a partner. And the third one is selling ads, which is a whole journey in itself, but just know that you would want to create a pitch sheet that outlines your listenership. And at this point, you would hope that you already have a listenership built up and who's listening, and then targeting companies that want to reach that exact same audience that you are already reaching, essentially. And then you would charge based on every 1,000 listens or downloads. And if you put an ad at the middle of your podcast, that's the priciest spot and the highest valued ad placement. And then that's called a mid-roll. And then you might have some at the beginning and end as well. So that's my little quick answer to, and as we're talking here, if anyone wants to try some of those tools I shared like right away and then come back with questions, you're also able to do that. Feel free. Yes. So, okay.
I think we probably need to wrap up. It's probably past people's lunch breaks. But you're around to take questions over Twitter, aren't you?
Yes, for sure. Twitter is a really great way of reaching me. I'm at Cupido, and also on LinkedIn. Feel free to add me, Amanda Cupido, and then yes, I just type that into the chat. And yeah, so feel free to ask me questions as you go along on this journey. And like I said, that there's going to be, and I'll send one last one from Christina, the Audible Walrus one. I will send that in the package that you get afterwards. We will add that in so you guys can have that information if you're interested.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was a really wonderful workshop. I know that the feedback already on social media and in the session has been really great. I loved it. I loved participating along with you in real time. So huge thanks to you. I want to thank the Toronto Public Library for sponsoring this week's workshop and for being a part of Communities Create. I want to thank everyone who showed up and participated. And I'm also thanking you in advance for the podcasts you're going to create. And remember, they can be super short. They can be longer. They are what you want them to be. But I'm really hoping that you'll participate and create content because I think that there is a bigger project that we're all part of together, which is to document this moment in history. I just wanted to remind everyone, Amanda was talking about that Friday, we've got a listening party. So if you've got stuff to share by Friday, we'd love to hear it, and she'll give some feedback and we can hear what everyone's been making. And then for now, a few things. We do have a bit of a debrief with our mental health team if you want to stick around and talk a little bit. It's a really interesting conversation last week after the photography workshop. And I also want to point out that on the Communities Create .ca website, there are some online resources in terms of well-being, mental health, and crisis resources if you want to access that as well. Thank you again. This was wonderful. I know some of you are super podcasters, but I really hope you'll come to some of the other sessions. Next week is Second City and comedy. There's one on a communal choir with Humber the week after. So there's some really great content coming up. And I hope to see more familiar faces coming back week after week. Diana, over to you. And thanks if you're taking off. It was great to have you participating.
Thank you. Yeah, fabulous workshop. I did want to make the comment about how we're feeling right now. I don't think there's ever been a time in our lives collectively where our emotions are taking such a roller coaster that how we feel right now can change so quickly, because I think that there's different influences on our emotional states all the time. And so the first message I have, and most probably